The Georgia Bulldogs are back on the road this week, taking on the Ole Miss Rebels. Kirby Smart met with the media today to talk about it. Let's get into it.
Yeah, we excited about this opportunity to play in another road big game. Ole Miss has got a tremendous team. You know, Lane's done an incredible job of getting talented players, big physical. The improvement on defense for them is extremely noticeable. These guys are disruptive, powerful, fast. Tons of sacks, tons of tackles for loss. I think Jackson Dart's playing probably one of the best quarterbacks playing in the country in terms of explosive plays. A lot of respect for how he competes, and the guy runs extremely physical, like a SEC running back. He doesn't try to avoid contact; he actually seeks it, and you can tell he's got a fiery, competitive attitude, just like his coach does, just like Lane does. So they have a lot of the same personality traits. Tremendous team that really should probably be undefeated. At the end of the day, they've had two really, really close games, both games that they could have easily won. So great challenge ahead, and our team's looking forward to it. We'll start getting ready today.
Kirby, you had some nice words for Dart there. I want to ask you, when I look at the receiving corps, does it remind you at all of Burrow and LSU when he had those targets and the way he was playing at that time?
Different offense, I think, very different offense in terms of that, but certainly the talent's there. I mean, they've got several draft pick receivers that are good players, got good tight ends. They got a really good scheme. You know, I think LSU had the same thing, but different scheme. Those two were not the exact same. You know, LSU could go a whole game without trying to run the ball. Ole Miss will run the ball. They commit to the run, and they create shots and RPOs off of their run game. That wasn't really the LSU MO.
So that's interesting. So that was an interesting question to compare those two teams, because my brain wouldn't have gone there. Like, I wouldn't have thought about those two teams. But to the more direct question about the talent that they have at wide receiver, the name everybody's going to know is Trey Harris for the Ole Miss Rebels. And that kid can flat play. There's no two ways about it. Coming into the season, most people thought Luther Burden III at Missouri was probably the best wide receiver in the class, and Trey Harris was right there, but he was probably the best wide receiver in this group of wide receivers inside the SEC this year. It didn't take long to bear out the fact that that was wrong, and that Trey Harris was, in fact, the best wide receiver in the conference this year. Maybe up against one of those LSU receivers might give him a run for his money. But Trey Harris is the real deal. And Priestcorn at tight end is a really good player for Ole Miss. At the end of the day, the thing I'm going to look out going into this game, the thing I'm going to look out for is last season, the offensive and defensive lines just didn't match up for Ole Miss. They just did not have the players. Georgia could put the bodies on them, control them, stone that pass rush the entire game. They ran the ball pretty much anytime they wanted to, especially late in the game after they had been leaning on them for a little while. So that's where it's all going to start, just like it always does in the SEC, on the lines of scrimmage. And if they have improved enough, then Ole Miss will have an opportunity for Jackson Dart and Trey Harris and those guys to do some damage. If they haven't, then that Georgia pass rush that is coming on as the season progresses is going to be able to create havoc for this Ole Miss offense, get them in third and longs, and then take advantage with the havoc that they can create. On the flip side, Georgia is still not running the football the way I would love to see them run the football. But this Ole Miss line is better than last year in that they are bigger and more athletic than they were last year. With all that said, Kentucky was able to put a hat on a hat and move bodies when they played Ole Miss. Georgia should be able to do that if they get after it. It's going to be a very exciting game for the Dogs on the road, but they had better pack their physicality and their defense, especially along the lines of scrimmage, if they want to get out of Ole Miss with a victory on Saturday.
Yeah, Coach, you talked about how physically Dart is or how physical he is as a runner. How do you go about coaching that up on the defensive side of the football when the sport's protecting the quarterback nowadays? Is it something you just, hey, play through that, go the whistle? But I think there was a moment in the LSU game where Whit Weeks kind of gets caught up in this. Is he going to slide? Is he going to be physical? how do you coach playing a quarterback that, has to be protected but runs physically?
Yeah, we talk all the time. We've played a lot of quarterbacks that are good runners this year. You tackle the quarterback like he's a running back. You have to approach it that way. I mean, he's 225 pounds and he lowers his shoulders and he's physical. He doesn't give himself up very often. So we don't coach it any different than tackling a back. He might drop his shoulder, he might choose to slide. You have to react to what he does, but you have to be physical now. You can't approach this guy like he's going to give himself up, because he'll run right through you.
There's only one way to play defense, and that's wide open. That is, you have to play it just like Kirby said. The ball carrier is a runner. End of discussion. It doesn't matter what his position is. Now, if he's inside the pocket, of course, you have to do the things that you have to do to not commit silly penalties that plagued the Dogs early this year. Hands to the head, face, that area. But the call against Jalen Walker in Kentucky, where he tackled the quarterback to the ground, got a flag. I still think that was a bad call, but you cannot, as a fan, you can't look at Walker and say he did anything wrong there. He was completing the tackle. So especially once that quarterback gets outside the pocket, he is absolutely a runner. He can defend himself, and you have to treat him the way you would treat any runner. And as a defender, you always want to deliver the blow, never accept the blow. It's the hammer and nail, right? You want to deliver the blow. And the more times you hit any player, especially a quarterback, it takes a toll on their body over the course of the game. And that's what you want to do as a defense, is impact the quarterback in any way possible.
What makes the run defense so successful?
They're big. I mean, they're physical. The only remedy for stopping the run is have big people that are hard to move. I mean, in our history here at Georgia, we've traditionally been pretty good at stopping the run. You go back to the Jordan Davis days, which were probably the best we had. So it's a strong physical defensive line, and they have it now. They're physical at the point of attack, and they're good at attacking and stopping the run.
Coach, going back to...
So we'll see if they talk about this a little bit more later, how these questions come to him. But that right there is telling you Kirby believes it's going to be challenging to run the football because they have big bodies that have to be moved. Georgia has big bodies too. It comes down to attitude. You literally have to drop behind your pads, sink your hips, drive your feet, and move another man that doesn't want to be moved. That's what it comes down to in the run game. I hope that Georgia packs that when they travel to Ole Miss, because it is going to be vital if they hope to control the run game on the defensive side, and if they hope to be able to run the ball effectively on the offensive side. Because if they can't, then you're going to put the ball in the hands of Carson Beck, who Kirby has said over and over and over is the key to everything they do. So he clearly has confidence in it. So that means we're going to have to see a variation of the run game. So swing passes, bubble passes. For the love of everything that is holy, could we see a true running back screen from this offense this year? They're going to have to get creative if they can't push the sled, as it were. And that means the ball's going to be in the air. And when you throw the ball, three things can happen. Two of them are bad. So that means that the wide receivers, the running backs, and Carson Beck are all going to have to be on the same page if Georgia's going to be effective offensively against Ole Miss on Saturday, from the sound of it so far. We'll see if they follow up with some more questions here.
Dart, same system for him 2 years in a row. Where have you seen that growth for him in his game to this year?
Well, he's more comfortable. I mean, he's played more football. He's got more experience. He's playing at a really high level. He sees things well. I think, he and Lane and the offensive staff are further along. They know what they're looking for. They know when you get in something, what beats that, and they know how to attack it. So he's just a proven winner, and he's a fierce competitor. He's hard to stop.
See, now this is a really interesting question, because essentially it was same quarterback, same coordinator in the second year in the system. That's the same thing that Georgia has going on with Beck and Bobo in the second year in this system. That's the same thing that we saw at Texas with Ewers and Sarkisian. Multiple years, same system, same coordinators. But all of those scenarios have played out differently. Jackson Dart last season looked like a world beater until he came up against the Georgia defense. Much of this season, he's looked very much the same. I know I watched the Kentucky game. Kentucky got after Dart. They physically hit him and they harassed him all day. And they covered up his receivers, and it was rough sledding for that Ole Miss offense. Georgia has the ability defensively to do the same thing. So yes, he should be, just like we would assume about Ewers, Beck, and Dart, you should be more comfortable. You should be better. You should understand what you're trying to do in the system, but you still have to go execute it. And the defense that lines up across from you has a lot to do with how effective any quarterback can be, really regardless of how many years you've been in the same system. But that is an interesting question. And the similarity is there. It will be interesting to see how those two perform on Saturday.
Kirby, when you reviewed the Florida game with Coach Bobo and the offensive staff, what are some of the key things in terms of Carson cutting down on turnovers that you guys are going to work on?
Just decision making. I mean, I think that's the bottom line. I think I was more pleased after watching the tape than anything because, I mean, I think out of 73 snaps, he had 68 winning decisions, really good decisions. I mean, 68 for 73, pretty good in any sport I'm in that you're in. I think the concern is the mistakes can't be catastrophic. You know, like you got to make good decisions, and you know the two plays that he ends up turning the ball over on, they weren't great looks defensively against that call. Like we were expecting something else. So when that happens, you got to play for the next down, right? It's the most common thing in football. You got to be willing to concede a down and move on, especially when it's first down. And both those were, and two of those were those situations. But I still think that 68 out of 73 decision-making processes, he did the right thing and made some really, really elite plays and throws within the game. So it's cutting down on the catastrophic things.
Well, this is the subject of the week, and that's the way Carson's turned the ball over the last few games. And here's what makes it difficult and challenging, especially if you're not willing to look beyond the box score. Everything Kirby said there is absolutely true. He made bad choices, and that cost him turnovers directly, right? So that's not good. That is decision-making. Whether it's trust, whether it is he just wasn't comfortable, whether it is exactly what Kirby said it was, which is, well, we didn't have a good matchup right there and he needs to play for the next down. All of those things are true. It's also very true that Kirby Smart said he made some really, really good plays in that game. Also a fact. Now, the people who don't want to see that aren't going to see it. They're just going to say he has issues, whatever. But it is a very perplexing question. And going back to that second year in the system thing, I believe we all would expect that a quarterback who's played as much football as he has and has played as much winning football as Carson Beck has, that we don't expect him to make those bad decisions regardless of what he sees. That was supposed to be the ace in the back pocket for the Bulldogs this year, the thing that they had that nobody else had. And so far, Carson has not shown that. So for everything that he's done better this year, whether it's the deep ball, whether it's the decision-making that Kirby's talking about, whether it's getting them in the right plays before the snap, those things are being overshadowed by the fact that almost inexplicably to the average fan, he's making those bad decisions that are directly turning the ball over. And again, you have to ask yourself, not in this game particularly against Florida, but over the course of the season, how many times have miscommunications, failure to complete a play, bad execution on a route been responsible for those interceptions, and how many of them have been directly on Carson? That's not to make an excuse for him, okay? Bad decision is a bad decision. That's his fault. But when you look at the total number of interceptions, it's only fair to call it what it is. And if the ball bounces off of a wide receiver's hands and then pops right to a defender, Carson can't do anything about that. If a receiver busts an adjustment at the line, Carson can't do anything about that. If a receiver fails to run a route at the correct depth, Carson can't do anything about that. So it is a very perplexing question. It is difficult. And for my money, I believe in Carson Beck. I think he's a winner. I am on team Kirby Smart when it comes to this. He's the guy. Those things are things that have to improve. His decision-making must improve. But everyone around him has to help him. It's never one guy completely. It's the unit. So we'll see if he can improve that moving forward. He has to if Georgia's going to get to where they ultimately want to get.
Kirby, on that note, like Carson continues to make some big throws even after the interceptions. Do you think that some of these these mistakes are just kind of that you all are playing a different way, that you're passing so much, and it's just going to happen, or is there something else that worries you about it?
No, I don't know. I think it's I just think first and foremost, he's done a tremendous job overcoming any mistakes he's had in the ability to go out and close things. There's a quality now that when you look across the NFL, you look across all sports, you look across the quarterback position, resiliency is a huge trait. And the one thing that this guy has done is when he's had to, he's gone out with his back against the wall and made some throws. He's overcome some bad throws earlier in the game. But I think he continues to show that. I think that's a good thing. I don't know that it's a product of the throwing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not that far off from previous years. I think people look at our stats and say that, but there's a skewed game in there. There's a game when we threw the ball the entire second half, just about. So you keep looking at stats and say, well, you're throwing the ball more, therefore you have these. I don't think that's a correlation, because we had games last year that it didn't matter what we did in the fourth quarter, because we were up by 30, we were up by 20, and you run the game in those. You run the ball sometimes in those, and that's been different. So I don't know that our differences in stats is more indicative of the games we've had to play in.
Well, that's completely fair. I mean, what Kirby said there, that's completely fair. But I'll reiterate, when you put the ball in the air, 3 things can happen. 2 of them are bad, okay? So whether it's circumstance or whether it's just a statistic anomaly, the fact remains that when the ball's in the air, it is in peril. As to his other point about about Carson Beck overcoming things, I 100% agree with that statement, because in the game, things are not going to go the way you want them to go all the time. That is simply part of it. And the ability to put whatever's happened before out of your mind, go out and execute when the money is on the table, which Carson has done time and time and time again this year, and lead his team to a score to win a game or to put a game away. You cannot throw that out with the bathwater. Those things are the intangibles of his makeup that are everything that we as Georgia fans would want him to be coming into the season. He has shown that. At times, like against Alabama, you throw the ball into the end zone and you trust your guy's going to make a play, the other guy makes a play. But if you're trying to win the game, that's what you have to do. So I 100% stand on the fact that because of his makeup, because of his experience as a baseball player, where you have to have an at-bat, see a new pitch, every pitch, put the last one away, move on to the next, Carson really, really does do a good job at that. He's this close to everything coming together to be what we hoped he would be. So again, for all the mistakes that are glaring that people want to focus on, there is a whole lot there around Carson Beck that is still really good. So hopefully it'll all come together for him and for this team.
Kirby, what kind of improvement have you seen from Ben YUROSEK since he got here this summer?
I think he's learned the speed and the way to approach practice here. I think sometimes that takes guys, it takes freshmen a long time, but it takes transfers sometimes. They'll say, golly, I didn't really know what it was going to be like. Usually younger guys that come in, transfers, not necessarily older guys, but his ability to practice well has got better with every week. And then it's translated to what he puts on the field. and he plays more physical. He practices more physical. He bought into the idea that, oh, if I actually practice like a game, I'll play better in the game, and that's helped him. It's helped us.
That's awesome. And it's a key statement about the way Georgia does things. And it's proof that what they do works if you're willing to give yourself over to the plan. And I will be the first to admit that early in the year, the first 3 or 4 games, I was really down on YUROSEK, and I didn't appreciate the way he was attempting to do what he was doing. The execution wasn't good. The effort, although it may have been there, just looked sloppy. It really looked out of place. But to Kirby's point, as the year has gone on, you can see a marked improvement in his blocking ability. He's getting into the pass game a little bit now. You can see the skill set as a receiver. So I'm proud for the kid and his journey. And obviously it shows that once he was willing to commit to the process, everything that the coaches saw in him, where he could be a player that was going to help them on the field this year, is in fact exactly what he is becoming. So kudos to him on his growth inside the program and as a football player, as well as in his performance.
Yeah, Ole Miss is obviously a team that heavily leans into the transfer portal. How would you assess how your team has gotten contributions out of the guys that you brought in from the transfer portal this offseason?
I'm trying to think of who all we've got. I mean, Ben YUROSEK is probably one of the primary contributors for us. We've got some guys in the secondary who came in that have probably helped some on special teams roles and helped some there. I think it varies position to position and year to year, depending on what you need. We've also got some really good young, talented freshmen that have come in that are going to be good players that we took over some transfers.
Yeah, Kirby, when you go back and watch the film from...
And obviously right there, he didn't mention Colby Young because clearly he's not with the team right now. So, and I don't remember, there was Etienne, Young, YUROSEK this past offseason. YUROSEK's contributing. There was the wide receiver from USC, Michael Jackson, who he mentioned on special teams that's been helping. So nobody's, blowing things up as a transfer this year for Georgia. They didn't have that sort of impact, probably because of Young's situation. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to do that in the future. And we all, by this point, understand Georgia's philosophy in the portal, and we can just watch that play out at the end of this year because there will be movement, both players leaving and players joining Georgia's program once this year is over via the transfer portal.
Saturday, one, how impressive was that interception that C.J. Allen made in the fourth quarter? And two, just how have you seen his football instincts develop as he's played more and more throughout this year?
Yeah, I think his confidence has improved. I was watching the Ole Miss game from last year, and I'm remembering, him and Raylan having to be out there together and playing in that game, and that's not normal for an inside linebacker to be playing as a true freshman in that magnitude of a game. And I think about seeing that picture and then seeing the picture of him playing against Florida. I thought the Florida game was one of his best games since being here. All in all, he had a couple touchdown saving type tackles. He had a couple checks on our defense. The obvious was the interception. He's a high motor, high energy, and you know what? He practices really hard too. So it carries over for him, and we have to keep him improving at that same rate.
That's the key to it for him and Raylan Wilson and all those young linebackers is you have to get better. The only way you get better is by playing. And as he pointed out, you don't want to throw him in the fire like what had to happen last year. And that's a good positive report on C.J. Allen because he came in with so much hype, people crowned him immediately as the next Nakobe Dean, right? As the next Roquan Smith. That sort of language for a true freshman. And that is an awful lot for a young man to take on. And once Smile Munden is healthy and comes back, that area on Georgia's defense is only going to get better. So as Georgia fans, we have that in our back pocket. These young kids are growing up, and as Georgia continues to get healthy, the unit that ends the season hopefully will look a lot more like that unit that started the season against Clemson, and we saw how dominant they could be. So that's something that we can look forward to as Georgia Bulldogs fans.
And Kirby, overall with this week, what are you kind of focusing on for Ole Miss? What are your biggest challenges that you foresee ahead?
Getting better. I mean, it's not always just about Ole Miss. It's about, we've got a tough schedule remaining, and Ole Miss is who we're focused on this week. And it's about us looking kind of inside and saying, what can we improve on and get better at that's going to help us in this game? It's going to be a very passionate, competitive, high-stakes game on the road in the SEC, in which, I've been to Ole Miss a lot of years, and it's a really tough place to play. And they'll have a great environment. So we're focused on us and getting better.
Not a night kickoff to Lane's chagrin, but it will be that classic middle of the afternoon kickoff for Georgia that they're accustomed to. Yeah, they're on the road, but it's not going to be that different in terms of how the schedule runs for them. So that's good. And it will be interesting to see what sort of atmosphere that Ole Miss can pull together for a game of this magnitude and whether the team will show up. Lane has a history of being a little up and down in terms of big matchups like this, whether or not he's too aggressive or not. But I don't think any of us should be surprised in what Kirby said there, how he brought it back to focusing on the team, because going all the way back to SEC Media Days, he made it a point to let everybody know that regardless of the movements and the machinery of the process in the season, the long game is what he's focused on, because he believes that Georgia was going to be in the playoff regardless of whether or not they won the SEC. We're on track to do that. So far, everything is on schedule. And if they can continue to improve, increase their health and their depth of players that can play winning football for Georgia, then as we get to the end of the season, you really sort of have to be good and feel confident as a Georgia Bulldogs fan, because the plan is going the way Kirby wants it to go. And as many of us often say, in Kirby we trust. So when you step back and look at the big picture, it appears that everything is moving in the right direction as a general sense, right? There are ups and downs every week, every game. There are things to nitpick. But in a general sense, it appears, at least to Kirby's eyes, that things are on schedule. And that's a good thing.
Kirby, what stands out to you about Ole Miss's run game this year?
Well, they do a great job of spreading you out. They're almost always right in the box count. So when you look at their runs, they got one more hat than you do, whether that's, I think at one point, I don't know if he still is, Jackson Dart is their second leading rusher. And that's just telling you, man, they got – and they get rushing yards, too, when he takes off and runs. And he's a tremendous athlete, hard to tackle. The backs are good. They do a great job getting a hat on a hat up front, and they do also. If you counted the passing yards they get on RPOs in their run game, they'd lead the country because they get a lot of yards off that as well.
So it's a challenging scheme, but nothing that the Dogs aren't used to. And Kirby just told you that Jackson Dart's a good runner, which puts the onus back this week on that defensive line for Georgia. Guys like Nazir Stackhouse, guys like Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Warren Brinson, those interior players are going to have to push the pocket against Dart when he does choose to pass the football, because we know the edge guys are going to do their work. But if you can get in Dart's face and sort of mush rush that pocket, not let him escape and hurt you. He's no Jalen Milroe, but he clearly can hurt you with his legs. So that defensive line, keeping contained, Chaz Chambliss and the boys on the outside, it is going to be a big part of how Georgia attacks Jackson Dart. Stop the run, squeeze the pocket, make those guys make plays on the back end, and take your chances with your defensive scheme about how many times they can execute that correctly. I think that's what we're going to see from the Dogs. We'll see.
Kirby, I know you go way back with Coach Kiffin, but in the chess match, what makes him such a well-respected play caller? What does he do offensively, strategically, that makes his style so difficult to defend?
Yeah, he knows scheme. Lane's been around a lot of football. His dad's one of the greatest defensive minds there ever was. And when you start talking about Lane, being around him, talking ball, being with him, he knows how to attack defenses, probably at a higher rate than most offensive coordinators. He's been experienced with that. He knows the difficulties that come with it. Now, that's one thing to know it. It's another thing to have players that can take advantage of it. So he has that too. So when he has a quarterback that thinks like he does and they understand things, his offensive coordinator, Charlie, does a great job too. And they got Joe Cox, who was over here. They got really good offensive staff. So they know how to attack defenses, and that, at the end of the day, you can't make it about scheme. You got to make it about, do I play harder than the other guy across from me? Do I play smarter than the other guy across from me? Do I play more physical than the other guy? It still comes down to blocking and tackling a lot of times, and both teams do that well.
Jimmys and Joes, not X's and O's. And I think that's something that Lane Kiffin told us last year when he walked off the field in Athens after taking just a beatdown at the hands of the Bulldogs. And that was that we don't look like them. We do not match up like them. And then, of course, Lane Kiffin, as his wont, chose to go into the portal heavily to try to remedy that. He believes he has. They are definitely better. But as I told you, I watched Kentucky put a hat on a hat and physically win against Ole Miss time after time after time. You would like to think that Georgia would be able to do something similar. And if they can at least get a stalemate, you would like to think that Georgia has enough skill and enough veteran leadership and execution to be able to take advantage of that Ole Miss defense not shutting Georgia's offense down, right, in a stalemate situation. So that's where we are. Kirby's stripping it down. He's keeping it simple. Scheme is what scheme is. We scheme them up too, right? That's what he's thinking. Me and Schumann and Robinson, we're going to scheme them up too. At the end of the day, it comes down to who's going to win that man-on-man battle, as it always does. But given what Kiffin said last year after the game, that is going to be a real point of focus heading into this game. The very physical nature that Georgia's going to bring and whether or not Ole Miss can stand up to it for 4 quarters.
Post-game Saturday, you mentioned Carson and the receivers and kind of some miscommunications with signals and stuff like that. What do you guys do kind of between now and Ole Miss to solve for that before you go into another tough environment on the road?
Same as we've done every week. Practice it. Put it on tape. That's what we do. We practice it each week. We do it with crowd noise. We do it with different ways to communicate. And it doesn't take but one. You can do 52 of those right, and you do one wrong, and the one wrong is the one that people talk about. So you just got to do it right all the time.
And he hit the nail on the head right there that we were talking about earlier, coming back to communication, when you get one wrong, just like at Alabama, you miss a communication, and what should be a pass to a wide receiver that goes for a good gain, potentially a very good gain, that turns into an awful looking interception for Carson Beck. It's that simple. You got to get it right every time.
Coach, what is your anticipation on Etienne's availability with the rib injury this week, and your run game in particular? Obviously, that's very important and kind of related, but I did want to get your thoughts on the weather. How closely are you watching it in terms of preparation for the possibility of rain?
Yeah, we keep an eye on the weather at all times. We get updates each day, so we'll see kind of what happens with that. Etienne, I feel good about. He felt good yesterday and did some things yesterday with our guys, and I don't know a lot until we get out there and practice today, but we'll certainly see, how he feels. The trainer feels good about him, and the big thing is just his ability to sustain and deal with a little bit of pain, because he's going to have some there. But he is a tough kid, and I think he'll do well with it.
Well, that's positive. You want him to be at 100%, but if you can't, you just got to toughen it up, put a little, balm on it or something, loosen it up, keep it loose during the game. Hope you don't take a direct hit on it. Maybe put an extra pad around your ribs or something, whatever you got to do. So hopefully he'll be able to go. But this lets you or makes you happy that Georgia has as many bodies in the running back room that they think can help them. Because even if he does have to take fewer carries, you have a guy like Frazier who, although is young and learning, is improving and getting better and showing us exactly what he's about. You always have Jones right there, who we know can contribute and help. And then there are younger backs. Phillips, Chauncey Bowens has been talked about a lot this year as potentially getting carries. So it's really nice this season to have backs that they believe can help, even when your number 1 or number 2 back is injured and can't go.
Hey, Coach, quick question is, it seems like week in and week out, obviously,
these games get harder and harder. You said you guys want to peak at the right time. I mean, how do you mentally prepare your guys every single week to go into another tough SEC game, and not just another tough SEC game, but another tough road game?
Every week is a season, and so we're on a new season this week, and I honestly think you prepare for things like this in the off season with the mental fortitude of your team, the conditioning that your strength staff does, the adversity you put in front of them. I mean, there's nothing that can simulate the schedule that we have. I can't go in the off season and simulate the schedule, but we try to be, businesslike and intense throughout the season and not treat one game bigger than the other, because when you do that, the kids kind of read into it. So for us, it's a lot of big games. And I think the elasticity of someone's ability to focus can be stretched, and we're trying to stretch that mental preparation so that they can do it over and over again throughout the season, however many games it takes.
Man, I love Kirby. Those answers are good. They're so, once you get what he's talking about, answers like that just make you feel so good as a fan, because you know that that's what the players are hearing day after day after day. And opposing fans don't necessarily like it when I bring it up. But it's like he has said, it's like the players have echoed, it's like I've said many times, it is a big game because Georgia is in it. So if you were wearing the Power G and the red and black and the silver breeches, guess what? Anytime you step on the field, that's a big game. So to just have that reinforced over and over and over, and then you understand the process of the offseason and what Georgia does, the skull sessions, the way they try to unite the team, the way they work in the offseason weight room, that sort of thing. Kirby's just calling back all of those things and saying that is where we become who we are. And it shows on Saturdays in a schedule like this. Yes, this is a very, very difficult schedule for Georgia. We all knew it was going to be challenging. That's why they did all that stuff already. Now they have to go back, remind the players of who and what they are, what they've done, and that they were built for this. This should not come as a surprise. I don't believe it will.
Coach, can we get an update on Smile Monday? And maybe figure Roderick Robinson may be out for the season, but if he's not, let us know. And the latest on Anthony Evans and his hamstring.
Yeah, again, we're hopeful to get those guys back. It's the biggest thing. I mean, I don't know at what point it's going to happen, but each one of those guys rehabbing, working their butts off, and hoping to get back to help the team soon.
Yeah, that's all you're going to get from Kirby. We hope to get him back. Here's the thing, and I mentioned this way back when, and I think it flew under the radar for a lot of people, but Rod Robinson, when you have a turf toe that requires surgery, the general sense is that you're looking at a minimum 12 weeks, probably more like 16 weeks before you actually start to run and move and be any kind of athlete again. So when I heard he was having that surgery, essentially wrote him off for the year, because if he comes back, it's not going to be until December in the playoffs somewhere. Now, that's just my thoughts on Robinson. As far as the other guys and the other injuries, what are you going to do? He addressed Evans the other night. They believed that he might be able to go. They'll learn more at practice today. Hopefully Evans can play. I think that is a huge deal for Georgia. They need him to go. Kirby's just not going to give up a lot when it comes to the injuries. We hope to get them back.
Coach, you faced a number of teams these last couple of years that play at a high pace. And what makes what Ole Miss does offensively with their pace different than some of those other programs?
Well, Ole Miss is a very super high pace. They get tons of snaps. Lane does a great job of doing that. It's not always tempo, although tempo factors into it. They want to get you worn down. They want to get you tired. They want to go quick. But they do a little more than your traditional just fastball teams. They'll formation you. They'll motion, which some teams don't like to motion because it slows you down. They'll motion. They'll have different splits. They're creative within their tempo to not just do the same thing over and over. They do a good job mixing it up. It helps them in the run game. It limits defenses from doing as many things, but it's hard to simulate. I'll say that, and they've been very successful at it.
Well, and that goes back to the scheme question from earlier. And it's the closest question we've gotten to. Everybody's aware that Ole Miss players in particular, there seemed to be a rash of injuries that were used to either buy time or slow down an opposing team surrounding the Ole Miss program. And now that the SEC has addressed that, telling everyone that there will be severe penalties applied if that's deemed that you're doing that, in an unethical kind of way around injuries. We will see if any of that pops up in this game against Georgia. I don't believe it will, really, because of the new SEC rules, but it could. So we'll see. The other part of that, though, is going back to that scheme question about what they do and how they do it. It's window dressing, because all these plays, I don't want to say all, the majority of these plays, these teams share. It's all about how you get yourself into the play, right? Window dressing, who's lined up where, how do you create the matchup you want? And that's what he's talking about there when he's talking about motions, how it helps the run game sometimes, how it slows down the fastball, that sort of stuff.
Commissioner Sankey released a fairly strongly worded memo about feigned injuries and the SEC.
There you go.
I wondered if you saw that as a growing problem in the league, and did you feel it necessary to address your players with what the commissioner said?
Yeah, I respect Commissioner Sankey and what he sends out. We don't condone that on our team or within our program, so we don't have to address it. We just keep telling them that if you're injured, you stay down, and if you're not, you get up and go play. That's our philosophy.
There you go. Straight ahead. Boom. That's the answer. That's the only answer it should be. Rub a little dirt on it. If you're fine, get up, go play. If you're hurt, stay down. That's what we want to do. Let the trainers look at you. It's not that hard. It's when you see all that craziness that we saw earlier in the season that it gets out of control and requires the commissioner of the league to make a statement and institute a penalty. So again, I don't really expect to see it this weekend, but we'll see.
One more question. Coach, at the beginning of the year, you talked about coaching up the bottom of the roster. It looked like there was a little bit more of a distribution of snaps on the defensive line. Are you starting to come into your own there in your defensive front with some of these younger guys like Jarrett McLeod getting in?
They played, Xavier's played a few snaps in each game, and I want that to continue to grow. I think both Jarrett and Xavier are going to be really good players, and still hopeful to get Jordan back in the mix with that too. But those guys practice hard. I think it was the temperature was a little bit warmer down there, and the volume of snaps we were taking and the physicality of the game. So the more guys you can play, the harder your guys can play. So we want to get as many guys as we can that can play winning football so that we can play more people.
Well, always. It's going back to what we mentioned earlier about the long game. You want to build that quality depth of players that can play winning football. And it seems that Georgia is right on schedule with that. Hopefully those guys can play even more as needed. That's it for this time. You guys enjoy the games. And as always, go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.